The components of this door frame consist of one aluminum sill, 2 oak door jambs, and 1 oak header, 1 fir mull post, and the first seat for the sidelight to sit on. I copied the measurements of the existing door as the new door is going to be the exact same size. Using those measurements, I cut the door jambs to length on my miter saw. And then on the top of the door jambs, I marked the thickness of the header. On my miter saw, I set the depth stop so that I only remove the top section of the door jamb. This creates a little seat for the header to sit in. I proceeded to remove the thickness of the header on both pieces of door jamb. I did a similar thing to the bottom half of the door jamb to where the sill sits. As the sill has a 6 to 7 degree angle, I cut a sliver of the sill to help me mark to where I got a cut. And again, using my depth stop on my miter saw, I removed the section to where the sill was going to sit, making sure to only remove the top section of the door jambs. I then cleaned up all the saw cuts using a chisel. I cut the header to its width, not forgetting to include the 2 thicknesses of the door jamb. I then cut the sill to the exact same measurement as the header. As the sill is mostly made of aluminum, I can cut this on my miter saw. Once all the pieces of the frame are cut, it's time to assemble. To attach the header to the jambs, I glued them together using wood glue. I permanently fixed them together using wood screws, making sure that I countersink the holes so I don't split the oak. I repeated the exact same steps on both sides. I used a similar technique to attach the sill, except on the aluminum parts I used silicone instead of wood glue. To attach the mull post to the frame, I measured the width of the new door and I added 1/4 inch to that measurement. That 1/4 inch allows 1/8 inch gap either side of the door. I then squared off those measurements, and to the area the mull post is going, I applied silicone on the aluminum part and wood glue on the wood part. I permanently attached the mull post to the sill using 3-inch wood screws. I adjusted where needed, making sure that the mull post sits flush with the back of the sill. I fixed the top of the mull post to the header using the same techniques as below. I then measured and cut the piece of fir to which the sidelight sits on, and then permanently fix it to the sill using wood glue and 3-inch wood screws. And once the frame was built, it's time to put on the hinges. I marked out the hinges at a standard height, 5 inches from the top, 10 inches from the bottom, 1 in the middle, but I also added a second hinge at the top due to the door being so wide and heavy. I squared off each mark and marked the top of the hinge on each line to save confusion. I cut out the hinges using a trim router and this simple L-shaped jig that I made. It's essentially a piece of scrap material made into an L shape with a cutout of the exact same size as the hinge. I then use a flush trim bit in my router, cutting out the perfect shape of the hinge. I lined the jig up to the marks that I made and then clamped it to the door. I'll link in the description down below which router bit that I used. I set the depth of the router bit to the jig plus the thickness of the hinge, and then proceeded to cut out the material where the hinge is going to sit. I then cleaned any small bits that was missed with the router using a chisel. You can see here how this simple jig works perfectly. I cut out the remaining 3 hinges using the same steps as before, making sure that the jig is clamped tight to the door. Once all the hinges were routed out of the door, I pre-drilled all the holes using a countersink. I then screwed all the hinges to the door using the screws provided. I cut out the hinges on the frame the exact same way as I did the door, except before I made my marks I added a 1/8 inch strip. Measuring from that 1/8 inch strip will create that offset from the door to the frame, creating that equal 1/8 inch gap around the hole of the door. Once I got all the hinges cut out, I hung the door to the frame, making sure that everything fit correctly. Once I was happy with that, it was time to apply the finish. I decided I wanted the exterior parts of the oak frame stained black, so I taped off any of the visible fur parts of the frame. I also taped off the sill as we're going to add a clear coat to the whole thing afterwards. Using a good stain brush, I applied dark black stain to the exterior parts of the oak frame. This is why I chose oak for the frame. I wanted the dark appearance on the outside, yet I wanted to be noticeable that it's still wood. Because it has such an open grain, you can stain it with a really dark colour yet still clearly make out the grain of the wood. I cut off 1/2 inch off the bottom of the door using my track saw to allow for a weather strip. I then gave the whole door a good sand to 180 grit. I then also eased any sharp edges of the door by hand. For the finish, I'm using Salmon water-based exterior clear coat. I'll link the clear coat and the stain that I use in the description down below. I applied the clear coat using a new stain brush, brushing long strokes following the grain of the wood. I did this on both faces and all 4 edges of the door. I used the same clear coat using the same techniques on the whole door frame. In between each coat I gave everything a good sand with a 220 grit sandpaper. I repeated the same process 4 times on both the door and the frame. I followed the same finishing techniques on 6 pieces of 1x4 oak trim, 3 of which are stained black for the outside. Once the finish was complete, it was time to remove the old door and get the new one installed. I knocked out the 3 hinge pins and removed the door out of position. I then carefully, using my sawzall, removed any of the screws or nails holding the frame into place. I then wiggled the frame until I could completely take it out. Once the old door frame was removed, I gave the door opening a good clean. To install a new door correctly, you do need a few tools. You need a set of levels, an impact driver or a drill, a hammer and some fixings, a sharp knife and a tape measure, some weather barrier and some weather barrier adhesive, some tuck tape, some expanding foam, and some shims. I inspected the opening to see if we had any leaks or it needed any repairs. As it didn't, I sprayed the lower half of the door opening with weather barrier adhesive. I cut a strip of the weather barrier, the length of the sill plus 6 to 10 inches either side. I then stuck the weather barrier down, ensuring that it goes up 6 to 10 inches either side of the door opening. I also made sure that I could wrap it around the outside of the opening about an inch. I then cut 2 more pieces of weather barrier to go on either side of the opening. Make sure I overlap around 6 to 10 inches. As this area is covered, it's unlikely that it's going to get rained on, but I tuck tape the remainder of the opening for peace of mind. Once the weather barrier is complete, I check the opening for level and plumb, and it wasn't. I carefully brought the new frame in and flushed it up with a drywall on the inside. I then began by leveling the frame with the sill. As it was slightly out of level, I shimmed the sill until it sat perfectly level. I then start by getting the hinge side of the frame nice and plumb. I shim and fix the top and work my way down. That way your shims don't all fall out when you put in a fixing. Once the frame is sitting level and plumb, it's time to start adding some fixings. I begin by pre-drilling a series of holes behind the hinges as close to the kerf for the weather strip as possible. That way once the weather strip is installed, it will hide the fixings. For the actual fixings, I'm using 3-inch GRK R4 framing screws. I will link these in the description down below. Ensuring that the frame is level and plumb, I add the first fixing in the top hole, making sure to stop just before it bites. I'll then shim the frame just above the screw, ensuring that the frame is nice and plumb. I'll then tighten the screw until the frame sits nice and tight against the shim. I'll repeat these steps on all the pre-drilled holes, adjusting the frame and shims where needed, making sure that it sits nice and plumb and flat with a level. Once I'm happy that the hinge side is nice and plumb, I'll then attach the other side the exact same way. Once the frame is locked in, it's time to bring in the door. I found the easiest way to install a big heavy door is to bring the bottom of the door into the door frame until you can get the top hinge in line enough to get a couple of fixings in it. I then, using some wedges, bring the bottom of the door out until all the hinges line up. I then screw in all the hinges to the frame. Once the door is swinging, I'll make sure I still have the equal gap around the door. If not, I'll adjust the frame accordingly. Once I'm happy, I'll spray expanding foam around the gap in between the door and the door opening. I'll then let that dry and then remove any excess foam and then cut off all the shims. As the door is so heavy, I added a couple more fixings around the frame to completely lock it into position. Once I was happy with that, it's time to install some hardware. I picked up this deadlock from my local Home Depot, which I'll link in the description down below. I applied some painter's tape to the area to which I want to attach the lock to. I then marked the height of where I want the lock to be, and then I squared that line around. To cut out the big hole for the lock, I used a 2.5 inch hole saw bit. At the height that I marked, I started drilling the hole 2 3/4 inches in from the side of the door. I drilled through until the pilot hole came through the other side of the door. I then proceeded to drill from the opposite side of the door. This just helped prevent tear out. I then drilled a 1 inch hole center of the door along the squared line. I slipped the lock in place and then traced the outline of the decorative plate using my knife. I then chiseled out the depth of the decorative plate using a chisel. Once it was cut out, I pre-drilled the holes using a countersink and then fixed the fixings in by hand. I then attached the 2 faces of the lock, ensuring that the key section is on the outside. I put the lock in the locked position and then marked the height of the deadbolt on the frame. I then marked out the receiver plate to those markings using my knife. I drilled a 1 inch hole center of those markings about 1/2 inch deep and then cut out the depth of the receiver plate using a wood chisel. I then again pre-drilled the holes using a countersink and then attached the plate by hand using the fixings provided. Once the lock was complete, I cut and slipped in the weather stripping into place and then made a start on the handle. I marked the fixing holes of the handle, center of the height of the door, and 6 inches in from the edge. I then at those markings drilled a level 1/2 inch hole top and bottom. I then inserted the metal protective sleeves provided. I then slipped the exterior part of the door handle through those holes. I then threaded on the fixing collar, attaching the handle into place. Once those were on, I attached the interior side of the door handle onto those fixing collars. I fixed it down permanently using an Allen key and the grub screws provided. I'll link the handle that I used in the description down below. Because there was no way of keeping the door closed without locking it, I picked up these 2 super strong door magnets. I attached the top part of the magnet to the top of the door by drilling a 1 inch hole and then screwing it down. I then attached the second half to the top of the frame in line with the one of the door, except I offset it 1/8 of an inch towards the outside of the door. That way the magnets will naturally pull the door closed. To install the sidelight, I placed a bead of silicone along the lip to where the glass will sit, making sure to keep a nice even bead and not having any gaps. I then carefully brought the glass into position, applying pressure towards the silicone. To keep the glass permanently in position, I use these 1x1 fur beading pieces. I cut them to length and applied a small bead of silicone on the inside edge. I then carefully tapped it tight and then pinned it in using my pin gun. I cut the trim for the inside and then I used dominoes to help me lock it nice and tight into place. I have a more detailed video on how I do trim, which I will link down below. I then measured and cut the trim for the outside. As there was a slight step from the framing of the door and the siding on the house, I had to cut this little channel out the back of the trim. In that channel, I applied some black caulking. This is going to help fix and seal the trim to the exterior of the house. I attached the trim into position using my brad nailer, using stainless steel pins. Like I mentioned in the start of the video, this is episode 5, season finale of my modern entryway build series. But don't panic, because this is just the beginning for Rad Dad Builds. I have a whole bunch of awesome content, video series and DIY projects coming up very soon. So you're going to want to subscribe to not miss out on that. Also, go follow me at Rad Dad Builds on Instagram to get a head start on this awesome content. So as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me down below. Again, go follow me on Instagram at Rad Dad Builds. And as always, stay rad. Peace.